Ethan Cole had always believed that time was his biggest enemy. No matter how hard he worked or how carefully he planned, he always seemed to be running out of it. Deadlines crept up faster for him than for anyone else. Opportunities slipped through his fingers, and every mistake he made felt permanent, like a stain he couldn't wash away. Living in a small, quiet American town called Millbrook, Ethan's life was ordinary on the surface, but underneath, it was filled with frustration. He worked at a mid-level corporate job that demanded everything but gave little in return. His boss barely noticed his efforts. His coworkers were always one step ahead, and promotions always seemed to go to someone else. It wasn't that Ethan was lazy or careless. He just never had enough time to get things right. That was the story he told himself over and over again, until it became something he truly believed. One evening, after another long and exhausting day at work, Ethan decided to take a different route home. The sky was dim, painted in fading shades of orange and gray, and the streets were unusually quiet. As he walked, his attention was caught by a small antique shop he had never noticed before. The sign above the door was old and slightly crooked, the kind you'd expect to see in a forgotten corner of town. Something about the place felt strange, not threatening, but out of place, like it didn't belong to the same world as everything around it. Without really thinking, Ethan pushed the door open and stepped inside. A soft chime echoed as he entered, and the air immediately felt different still, almost frozen. The shop was filled with old objects, clocks, watches, dusty books, and items whose purpose Ethan couldn't even guess. Everything looked like it had a story, like it had lived a life before ending up here. Behind the counter stood an old man, dressed in a dark coat, his expression calm and unreadable. His eyes, however, seemed unusually sharp, as if they could see more than they should. Ethan felt a slight uneasiness, but ignored it, brushing it off as nothing more than nerves. "Looking for something?" the old man asked in a quiet, steady voice. Ethan hesitated. "Not really. Just browsing." The old man nodded, as if he already knew that answer. People usually are. Ethan wandered through the shop, his eyes scanning the shelves. Most of the items were interesting, but none of them truly caught his attention until he saw the clock. It sat alone on a wooden shelf, smaller than the others but somehow more noticeable. Its design was simple, almost plain, with a clean white face and black hands. There was nothing flashy about it, nothing that should have made it stand out. And yet, Ethan couldn't look away. He stepped closer, drawn to it, without understanding why. "This one. What's special about it?" The old man appeared beside him almost instantly.
As if he had been waiting for that exact question. "That depends on how you use it," he said. Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" The old man studied him for a moment before speaking again. "It gives you time," he said, "but not in the way you expect." Ethan let out a small laugh. "Every clock gives time. Not like this one," the old man replied calmly. There was something in his tone, something serious, that made Ethan stop laughing. "So what does it do?" The old man's gaze didn't waver. "It lets you go back," he said. "A few seconds, a few minutes, sometimes more, enough to fix a mistake, enough to change an outcome." Ethan stared at him, trying to decide whether this was a joke. "That's not possible." The old man didn't argue. He simply said, "Most things aren't, until they are." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The shop felt quieter than before, the silence pressing in around them. Ethan looked back at the clock. It was still just sitting there, unmoving. Ordinary, yet now, it felt different. Dangerous, even. "If it really does that," Ethan said slowly, "why sell it?" The old man's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. "Because everyone thinks they want more time," he said, "until they understand what it costs." Ethan's curiosity grew stronger than his doubt. "And what does it cost?" The old man paused, as if choosing his words carefully. "That depends on how much you take." That answer didn't make sense, but Ethan didn't press further. Instead, he reached out and picked up the clock. It felt heavier than it looked, solid and real in his hands. "I'll take it," he said. The old man nodded, as if this outcome had always been inevitable. "Of course you will." Ethan paid for the clock, though he couldn't later remember exactly how much it cost. As he left the shop, he turned back for a moment, but the old man was already gone, and the shop felt emptier than before. That night, Ethan placed the clock on his desk and stared at it for a long time. Part of him felt foolish for believing even a fraction of what the old man had said. It was just an object. A strange one, maybe, but nothing more. Still, the thought lingered. What if it's true? The next morning, Ethan overslept. His alarm hadn't gone off, and he woke up in a panic. He rushed through his routine, grabbed his bag, and ran out the door. By the time he reached the office, he was already late. His boss was waiting, clearly annoyed, and Ethan knew he was about to get another lecture. "I'm sorry," Ethan said quickly. "It won't happen again." But his boss shook his head. "You've said that before." The words hit harder than Ethan expected. He stood there, frustrated, embarrassed, and tired of always being the one who messed things up. Then he remembered the clock. The thought came suddenly, almost like a whisper in his mind. "Try it."
Ethan hesitated. This was ridiculous. There was no way it would work. But what if it did? Slowly, he reached into his bag and pulled out the clock. His hands trembled slightly as he turned the dial back. Just a few seconds. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the world shifted. It wasn't dramatic. There was no flash of light, no loud sound, just a subtle, almost invisible change. And suddenly, Ethan was standing outside the office door again. Before he had walked in, before he had been late, his heart started racing. No way. This time, he entered calmly. His boss looked up, but instead of annoyance, there was only mild surprise. "You're early," he said. Ethan blinked. Early. He checked the time. He wasn't late anymore. He hadn't been late, because it had never happened. Ethan felt a strange mix of shock and excitement building inside him. The impossible had just become real. The clock worked, and in that moment, standing there with the second chance in his hands, Ethan didn't think about the warning. He didn't think about the cost. All he thought about was one thing. What else could he change? Ethan didn't touch the clock for 3 days after that first impossible moment. He tried to convince himself it had been some kind of illusion, a trick of stress or lack of sleep. But deep down he knew the truth. The presentation he had given at work had gone perfectly, not because he was prepared, but because he had already lived it once before. That realization sat heavily in his mind, refusing to fade. The clock now rested on his nightstand, silent and still, yet impossible to ignore. Every night, his eyes drifted toward it, curiosity slowly replacing fear. The old man's warning, "Use it carefully," echoed in his thoughts. But it no longer sounded like a caution. It sounded like a challenge. After all, what harm could come from fixing a few small mistakes? The real test came sooner than he expected. One Thursday morning, Ethan found himself running late again. Traffic was unusually bad. His phone kept buzzing with missed calls, and by the time he reached the office building, he was already behind schedule. Then came the email. An urgent client meeting in 10 minutes. His heart sank. He wasn't ready, wasn't even on the right floor, and there was no way he could make it in time. Panic rose in his chest, familiar and suffocating. He had been here before, on the edge of failure, about to disappoint again. And then, just as quickly, another thought replaced the panic. The clock. This time, it wasn't an accident. This time, it was a choice. He could accept the consequences like always, or he could change them. Without fully allowing himself to think it through, Ethan rushed back home, driven by urgency and something deeper, something more dangerous. The clock was exactly where he had left it, as if it had been waiting for him. He stared at it for a long moment, his reflection faint in the glass, before finally reaching out. His fingers hesitated, just briefly, then turned the dial back 1 minute. At first, nothing happened. Doubt flickered across his face. Then, suddenly, the world snapped hand. He was back in his car, stuck in traffic, 1 minute earlier than before. His breath caught as realization hit him. It worked. Not just once, not by accident, but by his control. This time, Ethan didn't panic. He adjusted his route, avoided delays, and moved with a strange sense of certainty. But even then, it wasn't enough. He was still cutting it too close. So he used the clock again, turning it back to more minutes. The shift came faster this time, smoother, like reality itself was beginning to accept what he was doing. Now, Ethan knew exactly what lay ahead. Every red light, every slow-moving car, every second that had once been wasted. He moved through it all effortlessly, as if he had seen the future, because he had. By the time he reached the office, he wasn't late anymore. In fact, he was early. The meeting that followed was flawless. Ethan spoke with confidence, answering questions before they were fully asked, anticipating problems before they arose. It wasn't just that he was prepared, it was that he had already experienced the entire conversation. His boss noticed immediately, and so did the client. By the end of the meeting, the deal was practically secured. When it was over, his boss gave him a look of genuine approval. "Impressive," he said. "Didn't think you had that in you." Ethan smiled. But inside, something had changed. He knew the truth. This wasn't talent. This wasn't growth. This was borrowed time. That night, Ethan sat alone in his apartment, staring at the clock once again. But this time, he wasn't afraid of it. He was fascinated. What had once felt strange and unnatural now felt like an advantage, something powerful, something he could control. The possibilities ran through his mind endlessly. He could fix mistakes before they happened, avoid embarrassment, stay ahead of everyone else. Every failure could be erased, every bad decision undone. It was more than a second chance, it was endless chances. And for someone who had always felt like he was running out of time, that kind of power was impossible to resist. He started using the clock more often after that. At first, only for important situations, meetings, deadlines, things that truly mattered. But gradually, the reasons became smaller. A missed call, a poorly worded message, a moment of hesitation in conversation. Each time, he turned the dial back just enough to make things right. And each time, it felt easier, more natural, like he was simply correcting the flow of his own life. Days turned into weeks, and Ethan became someone different, someone sharper, more confident, almost perfect. People began to notice. His co-worker Lisa even pointed it out one afternoon, saying he seemed like he always knew what was going to happen. Ethan laughed it off, but her words lingered, because, in a way, they were true. But not everything was perfect. One night, after using the clock again, Ethan felt something strange, a faint uneasiness, like a thought just out of reach. He brushed it off at first, blaming it on exhaustion. But then it happened again and again. A subtle discomfort, a quiet feeling that something wasn't quite right. It didn't stop him though, not yet. The benefits still outweighed the doubt, or at least, that's what he told himself. The first real sign came on a quiet evening. Ethan had just finished a long call with his mother, one that lasted longer than he expected. By the time he hung up, he realized he had forgotten to send an important report for work. Frustration hit immediately. Another mistake, another problem. His eyes slowly turned toward the clock. Just a minute, that's all it would take to fix it. Without thinking too much, he reached for it and turned the dial. The world shifted, and just like that, the problem was gone. He sent the report on time, everything back in place, as if the mistake had never happened. But as he leaned back in his chair, that same uneasy feeling returned stronger this time. It lingered in the air, quiet but undeniable. Ethan frowned, trying to understand it, but couldn't. Eventually, he shook his head and dismissed it. Probably nothing, he muttered to himself. Still, somewhere deep in his mind, a question had begun to form. If he kept taking time like this, where was it coming from? And more importantly, who was losing it? Ethan stopped using the clock for a while, at least. 2 full days passed without him touching it. And in those 2 days, something strange happened. Life felt harder again. Not dramatically, not in any obvious way, but in small, frustrating moments that slowly piled up. Conversations didn't go the way he wanted. His timing felt off. And mistakes, tiny ones, started creeping back into his routine. It wasn't that things were falling apart, But without the clock, he felt limited, like he had been given something extraordinary, and then forced to live without it again. The awareness of what he could do made every normal moment feel heavier. Every imperfection stood out more sharply because he knew it didn't have to exist, and that was the real problem. The clock hadn't just given him control over time, it had changed how he saw it. On the third day, the pressure finally broke him. During an important client call, Ethan found himself caught off guard by a simple question, one he should have anticipated, but his mind went blank, completely blank. The silence stretched uncomfortably, and before he could recover, his boss stepped in and answered for him. The conversation moved on, but the damage was done. When the call ended, the disappointment in the room was obvious. His boss didn't raise his voice, didn't make a scene. He just looked at Ethan and asked quietly, "What happened to you?" That question lingered long after the moment passed, because Ethan didn't have an answer. He didn't know when he had started relying so much on something that wasn't supposed to exist. Back at his desk, he stared at his computer screen, barely seeing it. His thoughts kept circling back to the same place. The clock. He could fix this. He knew he could. He had done it before, over and over again. All it would take was a few seconds, a small adjustment. And the mistake would disappear like it never happened. His fingers tapped restlessly against the desk as he argued with himself. "No," he whispered under his breath. "I'm done with that." But the words didn't feel convincing. They never did, because the truth was simple. He didn't want to be done. Not really. The temptation wasn't just about fixing mistakes anymore. It was about control, about never having to fail again. That night, the silence of his apartment felt heavier than usual. The clock sat where he had left it, untouched but far from forgotten. Ethan stood across the room, staring at it like it might move on its own. "I don't need you," he said aloud, as if saying it would make it true. But even as he spoke, his feet began to move. Slowly, almost unconsciously, he walked toward it, step by step, until he was standing right in front of it again. His reflection in the glass looked different, now tired, conflicted, but also tempted in a way he couldn't deny. He reached out, then pulled his hand back, hesitated, and then, almost abruptly, he grabbed it. "Just once," he muttered, "to fix this." It was the same promise he had made before, and broken every time. When he turned the dial, something felt different. The shift still happened, the world still snapped back, but this time, it wasn't smooth. There was resistance, a brief, sharp pressure in his head, like reality itself didn't want to bend as easily anymore. Ethan stumbled slightly, catching himself on the edge of the table. The sensation faded quickly, leaving behind only a faint discomfort, but it was enough to make him pause. "What was that?" he whispered. For a moment, doubt crept back in, but then it was gone, pushed aside by the familiarity of what came next. The next day unfolded exactly as he expected. The client call happened again. The same question was asked, and this time Ethan answered perfectly. Confident, prepared, in control. His boss nodded with approval, and the moment passed as if nothing had ever gone wrong. On the surface, everything was fixed, but inside, something felt off. Not wrong in a clear way, slightly misaligned, like a detail in a picture that didn't quite fit. He couldn't explain it, but he felt it. Later that evening, as Ethan walked past a small newsstand on his way home, a headline caught his attention. It was simple, almost easy to ignore. "Local man dies in sudden accident." Ethan slowed down, his eyes lingering on the words longer than they should have. There was nothing unusual about its accidents. Happened every day. People died. It was a normal part of life. And yet, something about it made him uneasy. He didn't know the person. There was no connection. Still, the timing felt strange. Too close. too precise. At first, he dismissed it. Coincidence. That was the only logical explanation, but then it happened again and again. Each time he used the clock, that same uneasy feeling followed on. Shortly after, there was always something else. Another headline, another sudden death, another life ending without warning. Ethan tried to ignore it, tried to convince himself it meant nothing. "This is stupid," he said out loud one night, pacing his apartment. "I'm not causing anything." The idea sounded ridiculous, impossible. There was no way turning the clock could affect other people. No connection, no logic, but deep down, the pattern was becoming harder to deny. Eventually, he decided to test it. Just once, more but carefully. Something small, something harmless. He placed the clock on the table, took a deep breath, and turned the dial back 30 seconds. The shift happened instantly, smooth and clean this time. No resistance, no pain. Ethan sat down and waited. Minutes passed, then hours. Nothing happened. Relief washed over him. He even laughed quietly. "See? Nothing," he said, shaking his head. "I'm overthinking this." But the next morning, everything changed. His phone buzzed with a news notification. Ethan hesitated before opening it, a strange sense of dread creeping into his chest. When he finally tapped the screen, the headline made his stomach drop. "Teenager collapses during morning run, pronounced dead at scene." Ethan stared at the words, his heart pounding. Different person, different place, no connection to him. And yet, the timing matched perfectly. That was the moment the truth finally settled in. Every time he took time, someone else lost it. Not metaphorically, not symbolically. Literally. Ethan slowly sat down, his mind racing as the weight of his actions began to sink in. "This can't be real," he whispered, but deep down, he knew it was. The old man's warning, the strange feeling after each use, the pattern he had tried so hard to ignore it, all fit together now. This wasn't a gift. It wasn't a tool. It was a trade. And Ethan had been making that trade again and again, without understanding the cost. He looked at the clock differently. Now, not with curiosity or fascination, but with fear. "How many?" he whispered. How many times had he used it? How many moments had he taken? And how many lives had paid for those moments? The thought made his stomach turn. He stood up abruptly, pushing his chair back. "I didn't know," he said, his voice shaking. "I didn't know." But the words felt hollow, because now he did. And that changed everything. Backing away from the table, Ethan felt a growing sense of panic. There was no undoing what had already been done. No simple fix this time. Unless his mind returned to the one person who might have answers. The old man. If anyone understood what this clock really was, it was him. And if there was any way to stop this, any way to fix it would start there. Ethan grabbed his jacket, his hands trembling slightly. "I'm ending this," he said, more firmly this time. "No more excuses. No more, just one last time." He took one final look at the clock, then turned toward the door. But behind him, the clock ticked once, on its own. Ethan froze. Slowly, he turned back. The hands had moved, just slightly but enough to notice. His breath caught in his throat. "I didn't touch it." The room fell silent again, but the message was clear. This wasn't over. Not even close. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. The image of the clocks, hands moving on their own, replayed in his mind over and over again, refusing to let him rest. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw it just a slight shift, barely noticeable, yet enough to shatter any illusion of control he thought he had. Until now, he believed he was the one using the clock. But that moment changed everything. It suggested something far worse, that the clock didn't just respond to him. It acted on its own. And if that was true, than whatever he had gotten himself into was no longer something he could simply walk away from. As the first light of morning crept through his window, Ethan made a decision. He wasn't going to use the clock again enough for anything. He grabbed it carefully, almost reluctantly, as if even touching it might trigger something, and wrapped it in a cloth before stuffing it deep into his bag. Out of sight, out of mind. That was the plan. But even as he did it, a lingering doubt remained. Would distance really make a difference? Or had he already gone too far? He left his apartment quickly, heading straight for the street where he had first found the antique shop. The memory of that night was still clear. The dim light, the quiet street, the strange pull that had drawn him inside. If the shop was still there, then maybe the old man would be too. And if the old man was there, then maybe, just maybe he could explain what was happening, or even stop it. Ethan walked faster, his eyes scanning every storefront, every corner, searching for something familiar. But when he reached the spot where the shop had been, he stopped cold. It wasn't there. In its place stood a closed bakery, its windows covered, and its sign faded with age. There was no trace of the antique shop, no sign that it had ever existed. Ethan frowned, confusion turning into unease. No, this is the place, he muttered to himself. He was sure of it. The layout of the street, the buildings around it, everything matched, but the shop was gone, as if it had never been there at all. Looking for something, the voice came from behind him. Ethan turned sharply and there he was. The old man stood a few steps away, exactly as before. Same dark coat, same calm expression, same unsettling presence, as if he didn't quite belong to the world around him. You, Ethan breathed. Where is the shop? The old man tilted his head slightly. Where it needs to be, he said. That doesn't make any sense, Ethan snapped, his frustration rising. None of this makes any sense. That clock, why is it? What is it doing? The old man studied him for a moment, as if measuring how much he already understood. It gives you what you asked for, he said finally. I didn't ask for this, Ethan shot back. I didn't ask for people to die. The old man's gaze didn't change. No, he said calmly. You asked for time. The words hit harder than Ethan expected. He opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out, because deep down, he knew it was true. That was exactly what he had wanted. You knew, Ethan said, his voice tightening. You knew what would happen. I warned you, the old man replied. That's not a warning. Ethan stepped closer, anger mixing with desperation. You didn't explain anything. Would it have changed your decision? The old man asked quietly. Ethan froze. The answer came to him instantly. No. No, it wouldn't have. And that realization made everything worse. There has to be a way to stop it, Ethan said after a moment, his voice quieter now. Tell me how. The old man's expression shifted. Just slightly something, almost like approval, or maybe recognition. There is, he said. Hope flickered in Ethan's chest. Then tell me. But the old man didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned and began walking down the street. Ethan hesitated for only a second before following him. They walked in silence for several minutes, the sounds of the city fading into the background. Eventually, the old man stopped in a quiet alley, far from the noise and movement of the main road. This is not a tool, the old man said, turning to face him. It is a balance. Ethan frowned. What does that mean? It means, the old man continued, that nothing is given without something being taken. Every second you reclaim must come from somewhere else. Ethan's chest tightened. So it's true, he said. Every time I use it, someone else. Yes. The word was simple, final. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, pacing slightly. That's insane, he said. That's not balance, it is the only balance that exists. The old man interrupted. You are not creating time. You are moving it. From who? Ethan demanded. The old man's gaze hardened slightly. From those who have it to lose. The answer sent a chill down Ethan's spine. That's not fair. Fairness has nothing to do with it. Silence fell between them. Ethan looked down, his mind racing. Then why me? He asked finally. Why give it to me?